Good morning, everybody. We're just going to give it a minute or two for everybody to get in, so bear with us, and welcome to Wednesday. Ooh, hump day, hump day. It's one of my favorite commercials with the with the camel. I'm so excited about all of the fun new changes. I'm sure you guys are all too. Hi, Stacy. Good to see you. See you. Oh, wow, Holly, haven't seen you in a million years. How are you? Adela, how are you? Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Good to see you. Lots of fun and exciting new form stuff. They're still trickling in, so we'll give it a minute or two. I'm sure you guys have all been paying at least half attention to the news and the changes and the things that are trickling in. Obviously the forms even themselves have changed. We've talked about this before in previous presentations. They're going to change again probably between now and when they actually get released. The changes, the latest changes that we're going to go over now are ones that happened on the 9th, so just a couple of days ago. And this Zoom meeting is scheduled to be an hour and a half. I wanted to give us enough time in case there are some questions. And it'll be recorded. So if you miss anything, you can go back. I'm also going to put in the link. I'll do that right now in the chat. I'm going to put a link to the CAR link for all of the forms. In case you can't sleep at night and want to go look at all 68 forms. Here, let me grab that link real quick and throw it in there. Okay, so the link that I just put into the chat is to the CAR section with all of the new forms in it. And they're just a list. But it'll show you all, and those are all the red lines or new forms. So there's some that we're going to go over today. Most of what we've got is red line. Because again, it's changed even since it started, since the very beginning. Glenda, it should be right above you unless you got here afterwards in the chat. I can put it in again. Oh, because I didn't put that in there. Hold on. Let me see if I can hit to everyone. Yeah, I see that it isn't going out to everybody. Okay, just to add a fun level of excitement to this, Zoom changed a bunch of their settings. So Shirley, I don't know if you can help me here. It's not allowing me to chat with everybody, and I don't know why. So if you can copy that link, that would probably and put it in the chat for everybody. I don't know why I can't give it to everybody.
Okay, we'll take care of it, Nancy.
Okay, perfect. All right, so Shirley will put that in there for you. All right, so we're a couple of minutes in and we've got a lot to go over, so I'm gonna go ahead and start. And that way we can hopefully, hopefully get through some of this. So the first thing I'm gonna do is show you what I was talking about, which is the section that the let me turn this off real quick. So these are going to be all the new forms. There we go. All right, so there we go. Can you guys see that? There we go. Can you see that? Everybody, okay, good. All right, now we're going. So these are all of the new forms that are coming out. And you can tell when you look at these that the ones that are all red are the all new and exciting forms with all of the new things that have been added to them. So obviously some of them are only partially read, some of them are fully read, but those are what, that's what that link is going to go to. Okay, so the thing we're going to start with today is the one that most people have heartburn on, and I got to tell you, it is not, it's not something that's really going to be, I don't think, a problem. Anybody that's been in the industry for more than a couple of minutes will probably not really have a problem with this, because the fact of the matter is we already do most of this stuff anyway. We do it with our listing presentations. We're just going to add it to how we work our buyer presentations as well. So let's go with this. Okay, can you see the buyer representation and broker compensation agreement? Shirley, can you just tell me if they're, because I can't read the chat while I'm doing this at the same time. So if you could let me know that they can see that, that would be great.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, so this is the form that everybody's having such heartburn over. So the thing that's most interesting about this is that it's the grid system, which again, we're used to with the listings that we've been working with. So, I mean, the purchase agreement that we've been working with, and the listing agreement will also show this as well. So this is non-exclusive unless exclusive is checked and initialed by the buyer. Just so you're aware of this, it automatically sets to non-exclusive. So you want to make sure that you're clear when you're having that discussion with your buyer that this is a non-exclusive unless you check exclusive. Again, like with most contracts, it is not valid unless it has the names of both and it has a beginning date and an end date. You can't put to be determined. You can't put whenever we find something. You can only put a specific end date. And the rules are now going to have this only be viable for 3 months. That's a relatively new rule that was changed because of this agreement with the DOJ. And it says right here, the maximum representation period allowed is 3 months from the date of this agreement, unless the buyer is a corporation, LLC, or partnership. That's going to be your buyer, investor, clients, etc. The terms of this representation are basically as below. So the representation period, as I mentioned, you have to have a starting and end date. The type of representation, non-exclusive unless you check exclusive. And then that's only valid if they check here and also in paragraph 14, which is way down below, which gives the signature line. And the signature line, it's kind of interesting if you want to read this. Legally authorized signer, whether the signature or initials of the legally authorized signer identified as the signer or below appear on this agreement, it shall be deemed to be a representative capacity. So that means you don't even have to have the representative capacity agreement signature before this. This is essentially retroactive to that signature agreement. So you want to go back up. Now on this, it says that the agreement isn't valid unless it's checked and initialed in paragraph 14, which means once you have this discussion with your client, you want to make sure that they understand if they're agreeing to it, they have to sign an additional spot, or technically the check mark and the additional spot. So the property type, you're going to check here whatever they're looking for. Again, you're going to have that conversation. And there's another form that I'll show you as we go through this that has what types of properties that they're looking for. If you want to go through that, similar to the form has been out for a while. Essentially, nobody's really used it, but it's what is on that form. They're going to check like what's important to them. You know, I want to have land. I don't want to have land. I want to have 3 bedrooms, et cetera, et cetera. So this form states whether they want a single family, multifamily, industrial, vacant land, et cetera, et cetera. The location, and you can do counties, cities, you can go all the way down to neighborhoods if you want to. And that would be under additional description, or if we only want, you know, pink houses with blue shutters, anything weird like that. Likelihood is you're not going to utilize this section. You're going to have more of a general, because we all know buyers are liars, and we want to, that's not technically what everybody means, we know. But that sometimes they don't know what they want, and they think they want a certain area. But for some, it is extremely important. School districts, et cetera, that's going to be really important. The properties specified only on this line. So basically, you're only going to show them 1 or 2 houses, or the properties identified on the attached list. We've talked about that in the past, where perhaps you're going to have this client for a week. And so you have an agreement for that week, and you have a certain number of properties that you're going to be showing them. Sometimes that's more like a relocation type idea, but that could work for almost anybody. If they're nervous about signing an agreement with you and they only want to date for a while before they get into the real, you know, agreement where it's a, you know, the marriage part of it, and they only want to have 5 properties that they're going to look at with you, that's where you would have that agreement as well. Additional buyer preferences, that's the form I mentioned, BIPP, and we'll go over that in a second as well. So the broker compensation, this is something that we are going to be repeating until we're blue in the face, which is the amount or rate of real estate commissions is not fixed by law. It is negotiable. It has always been negotiable, but now we say it a bunch more times. I've heard it discussed as a drinking game. Every time you have to say it, you do a shot, but I think we'd all be drunk. The amount of compensation is specific in here. Now, again, you want to be careful when you're having this discussion with your clients. This D1 is your amount of compensation. This is where you negotiate for your worth and your value. Have that discussion with them. I've got X years of experience. I've done X many deals. I know what I'm doing. I'm worth it. Here's the amount I charge. You know, thank you, Mr. Buyer. This is your compensation. Then you have things in here like payments from third parties. Right now, this is still effective because there are still properties in the MLS which offer guaranteed commission. And so that is where this is a third party. However, if you have an agreement on this section here where you've said, all right, I am going to work for you for 1%, Mr. Buyer, or, you know, $10, you cannot then negotiate a higher amount if it's offered somewhere else. You can pay no more, or you can be paid, excuse me, no more than what you've agreed to on this section D1. You can negotiate down from it, but you cannot negotiate up from it. So the continued right to payment for broker-involved properties, this is where after you have an agreement with somebody, you've agreed to work with them for 3 weeks, and then they go back to Minnesota or whatever, but then they decide they're going to buy that house that you showed them. If that happens within however many days you fill in here, then they still owe you compensation for that time. The non-exclusive cancellation is effective upon receipt. Or you can put in there 10 days or 30 days after receipt. The exclusive is effective 30 days after a receipt. So if you have an exclusive agreement and they decide to cancel it, it will be a 30-day timeline before that is effectively canceled. So you want to have in here, within 5 days from the execution of this agreement, the buyer intends to purchase using a VA or other loan, which may not allow the buyer to pay brokerage. So I don't know if you've been listening to the news, I'm sure you have, but VA has actually, it's temporary because they haven't said it's permanent, but they have lowered that requirement for the moment. So at the moment, the VA is allowing those fees to be paid by the buyer in whichever agreement you end up with. Lenders have also lowered, some of us know that the lenders have a certain amount that they will only allow for that loan. And that's usually 3%. They have indicated, they have in writing, that the amount that is paid to a buyer representation or a buyer representation agreement amount is no longer part of that 3% that goes to the loan. So those two things have been impediments to buyers working with lenders, specific lenders in particular, to get transactions dealt with. And now that those are at least temporarily withdrawn, we can still work with those buyers. However, there are some loans that will not allow, some hard money loans, et cetera, won't allow the buyer to pay any fees. Okay, so I'm going to try and go through this because I know it's difficult to work on these forms without having questions in the middle, and to try and go back sometimes is very confusing. So the question here is, does D1 include either party's compensation offered by the seller or buyer side? This is an agreement with you and your buyer, period. That's what you have agreed to with the buyer. You do not have an agreement with the seller unless you are also representing the seller, but that's going to be a separate agreement. So these agreements are completely separate, and that is your agreement with your principal. So in this case, it's going to be your buyer, and it does not have anything to do with any other amount paid by third parties, which is D2. So any other amount paid by any other party does not come into D1, which is the amount you've agreed to work for your client for, if that makes sense. Okay. So let me just run through this real quick and see if there's any other questions that need answered right now. Okay, so if you have questions, by the way, put them in the Q&A. Don't put them in the chat just because it's much, much harder for me to monitor the chat. On D1, not understanding and dollar. Okay, so on D1, where it says the percent of the acquisition price, and then you can add and a dollar. So you can have, for example, you're going to work for a certain percentage of the price. You've agreed that that's what you're going to work for, but you also want them to pay your TC fee, for example. So that's another, $400 or whatever it is. That's where you would put that. So if there's any additional fees that you're going to charge for your services, that's where you would put it. Or you can work for a flat fee, or percentage or whatever is pursuant to the compensation schedule attached, which is incorporated here. And that's going to be if it's still in the MLS with a percentage amount. And that's going to really only apply if you're showing one or maybe two properties, which already have those in the MLS. We're trying to really kind of cover all of the possibilities here. So there's a lot of kind of moving parts. So you want to make sure that you're paying attention to what you're showing, what your agreement is, and how you've agreed to be paid and what that number is. Can you clarify exclusive and non-exclusive? Yes, if you have it's just like a listing agreement. If you have an exclusive listing agreement versus a non-exclusive listing agreement, you're essentially listing yourself with the buyer. So you are the buyer's exclusive agent, or your buyer is only working with you for this property, and you are not exclusive to that buyer. Your buyer can work with anybody else. And again, it's automatically non-exclusive unless you click the exclusive button. A lot of buyers are not going to want to be exclusive to one agent, because that one agent maybe doesn't cover all of the areas that they're looking, or all of the properties that they want to see, et cetera. So that is the difference between exclusive and non-exclusive. B4 and B5, do we have to attach the property address we are showing the clients? Well, the following specified properties. Yes, if you're going to specify properties, you're going to have to specify the property. It kind of makes sense. If you want to put in there, for example, you have a lot of people are concerned about buyers not necessarily wanting to sign a listing or a buyer agreement. So you're like, all right, you want to see, 4 houses this weekend. I'll work with you, but I want to have an agreement when I'm working with you. If you don't want to have something that's exclusive, or that you will only work with me for the next week on any properties, then these 4 properties that you want to see, I'm going to show you, and I'm going to be paid on those if you purchase those. That's what that's going to clarify. And that's what that would that's where you would put those addresses. And then if the buyer changes their mind on what they were looking for and we show them something else, can we use this to negotiate out of our agreement? I'm not sure what you mean by that. If you have an agreement with somebody that they are going to buy something in, 92067 zip code, and that you will represent them in that zip code, and then they change their mind and they want to go to 92028 zip code, and you don't want to represent that, you don't have an agreement. You only have an agreement for what you signed. So unless you say anywhere in San Diego County, in which case, yeah, you can negotiate that. But unless you can show that you have expertise everywhere in San Diego County, it doesn't make sense for you to do that. So you can still be compensated by the seller. Say the seller is offering a % commission and you negotiate a % commission from your buyer. Can you collect both? No, you cannot be paid more than your agreement with your buyer in your buyer representation agreement. If you have an agreement with your buyer for a certain percentage and the seller is offering more, you cannot collect the difference. You cannot make more than this agreement states. So the conversation would be, our agreement is for X because I'm worth X. If the seller is only offering a smaller number, then we can negotiate that at that time. And that becomes a negotiation in the contract that the buyer and the seller are negotiating with. The buyer has an agreement and an obligation to pay you for your services. How those services are paid can be negotiated and have always been able to be negotiated. How does this work on referrals? An example where a reload company takes 35% referral fee. Yeah, well, that number starts to get a whole lot smaller with these, because that's probably something that's going to have to change, just because it's not going to work for the way these deals are negotiated. Or a relocation company is probably going to have to figure out some way to make the buyer representation agreement be filled out for their side, and then you are paid a portion on that amount as a relocation referral, something along those lines. It's just it's too clunky otherwise. And then the responsibility for the negotiation on the purchase becomes sort of that second tier of that. But again, that's not something I can answer for a relocation company, just because they're going to have to figure it out. About compensation, if the buyer pays a percentage of the purchase price and then we request the seller to pay for this percentage credit to cover the agent compensation, what happens with the request for a repairs credit? Those are separate. Those are 2 separate things. It's just like if you are going into a purchase agreement and the buyer or the seller says, okay, we're going to give you a $10,000 credit for the roof. or flooring or whatever it is. But then you find that there's something wrong with the refrigerator. You're going to ask for two separate amounts, correct? Same with this. So you're going to go into this with, here's the amount that my seller or my buyer, excuse me, is asking for closing costs, maybe for roof repair, maybe for request for repairs, maybe. And then this is the amount that they're asking for buyer representation compensation. The amount of the purchase price usually reflects those amounts. So a lot of times, for example, in the past, when sellers have offered a flooring or roof credit or something like that, a lot of times they'll say with a full price offer. Well, it's just like every single contract that's out there states that it's as is, but everybody still asks for repairs. And every contract out there states it's a full price offer, but they're still going to negotiate. That's the same thing here. We're just going to negotiate slightly differently on the way that we're paid. Has charging the buyer to find a home always been a thing? Sorry, I'm still new. Well, I mean, you can argue that the buyer is always paid for that fee because it's included in the price that they pay to the seller, who then pays it back. The method by which it was paid has changed. That's basically it. The DOJ has decided that brokers paying brokers is somehow, evil and wrong, and we're terrible people for doing it. So what we're doing here is we're changing the way that is structured so that that same pie is now going to be split up differently. And instead of having it go to the seller, who then pays it to the buyer's agent or the buyer's broker, the seller's broker who pays to the buyer's broker, now it's the seller paying to the buyer to have his agent represent him. If the seller offers compensation in the comments, can you write addendum to change your amount agreed to in D1? No, that's not part of the contract. That's your agreement with your buyer. Your agreement with your buyer is separate from everything else. You have an agreement to represent a buyer for a percentage or an amount, whatever you've agreed to in D1. That amount is what is owed to you should you complete the task that you've agreed to complete, which is, find them a property, specific property or area, whatever it is. That amount is what they have agreed to pay you. If the seller is offering a different amount, that becomes a negotiation. And that is where the change really occurs, is that now becomes more of a negotiation, and the seller and the buyer both have more control, which is really what the intent of this agreement was. Would most agents want to be exclusive and should be something we push for? It really depends. I mean, like everything else, this is going to be dependent on your conversation with your buyers. Buyers are different. Situations are different. I'm going to say probably, essentially what we've been doing up until now is a non-exclusive arrangement with no guarantee of payment unless we got them into escrow on a property. And then we had the guarantee of that commission, which we had nothing to do with negotiating. Now we're putting the power back in our hands when we negotiate with our buyer, and the buyer's hands when they can negotiate with the seller over the cost and the fees that are paid, et cetera. So it's just separating it out so that everybody has more control over the bus they're driving, essentially. Okay. Would this form be used as an open house? No, there's an open house form, which I'm going to try and get to, but I do think it's important to answer some of these questions because I do think it's really different, and it's difficult for people to kind of swallow the way it works. If I have an exclusive for 30 days and they put in an offer with another agent, will I be compensated? On that property, yes. If you've shown a property, you can show that you showed it. You didn't just send them a link. You showed them the property, you gave them, lender information, you gave them area comps, et cetera. And you showed them that property. Yeah, you have an agreement with them on a buyer representation agreement. And actually, I serve on professional standards, I do hearings, et cetera. The rules for discussion on who basically gets paid were changed a number of months ago to reflect a buyer representation agreement having much more weight on the side of the agent. Should we go with but by the way, nothing is ever guaranteed, Judith. You know that as well as anybody in this industry. Anybody can sue for anything, and they can change their mind for anything, and they can, but you have a much better chance if you have a signed agreement. And again, have this conversation with your clients and explain to them that this is, you're going to talk about your worth, but then you're going to give them the options. You have many options here. This gives you much more flexibility. If you work with me, here's what we're working with. Here's what I believe I'm worth. And then you have other opportunities here. You can structure it this way. You can structure it that way. It depends on what your client's wants and needs are. And then should we go with a percentage ask and then negotiate down? Is unlikely to be going to the commission. So again, no, you don't want to say always do this or always do that. Each individual situation is different, and you want to approach it that way. But the conversation with D1 should be your worth and what you feel that you're worth. Again, you have that conversation with your client. We've all had that client that is, the slam dunk, and it's so easy, and there was never anything wrong and everything, and you just close and blah, blah, blah. Then you have the person who runs you ragged for, 6 weeks and puts 600 miles, on your car every day and, makes you crazy. Yeah, that may be a different discussion that you have with that client. So again, and just in general, you don't want to set a number that you're always going to do. You have a number you're aiming for. You have an amount that you feel that you're worth. But again, each individual situation is going to be different, and you want to work within that situation. So the implication of the paragraph about buyer financing or inability to pay is that we will request third-party compensation in the offer to purchase. I'm not sure what you mean by that, but that is a conversation that you want to have with your buyer. If you have a buyer that is working with a loan that may be problematic, you want to make sure you have that conversation with them and explain to them that, hey, Mr. Buyer, you're writing an offer on this property with a hard money loan, and the hard money lender has indicated that he will not pay for any fees. So that amount that we've just agreed to, which is a contract, then becomes your responsibility and cannot be rolled into your loan. Is that something you're aware of? That's a conversation you want to have. You want to explain to them what their options are and why it's important that they understand what they've signed on to with a loan and what they've signed on to with you in this agreement. If we write no compensation amount from buyer, can we then negotiate with the seller? No. If you write no compensation amount from the buyer, then you get no compensation, period. You cannot negotiate up from the amount you've agreed to and take more if the seller is offering it. If you have an agreement for nothing, then that's what you're going to get. I wouldn't recommend doing that because that seems counterproductive, but the amount that you agree to here is the amount that you are entitled to. If the seller is offering more, you are not entitled to the difference. This contract goes against real estate law, implied agency relationship. I wonder how that is going to work. Well, the DOJ would beg to differ. And that is the whole reason that this is being put in place, because they believe that our agreements have been against agency law. And again, we're not here to argue the law. We're simply, and by the way, these forms were written by the CAR attorneys who are pretty good at what they do. And have been working very long hours to clarify, along with our forms committee, to make sure that we have as much protection in here as possible. And if you are working with somebody that does not want to have an agency relationship with you, then again, we have a broker non-representation agreement that you can have them sign as well. And again, that's one of the things on the open house that we can get to. The buyer's representation agreement is optional. Right now, it is optional. It will become required. So these agreements go live in the MLS, on CAR, and I believe actually the MLS, at least with CRMLS, on June 25th. these forms go live. The MLS will change on, I believe it's August 12th. And the settlement agreement is supposed to be, was supposed to be August 17th. It's now been pushed back. But by the end of this year, it will be required. And that's for realtors. And in January of next year, it will be required for all real estate agents, regardless of whether or not they are a realtor. Okay, if D1 is selected and agreed upon as a percentage payment to the agent from the buyer, but a seller is currently offering a percentage to broker on the MLS, how does the D2 fit into that if not checked? It's included in the form, and it can be factored in. So if a buyer, if you've agreed with a buyer to pay you a certain percentage and the seller is offering another percentage, maybe a smaller percentage, that percentage literally is taken off. They will pay whatever that is, then that is taken off what they owe you, if that makes sense. Currently, the same is true if something's in the MLS. If you've agreed to a certain percentage and something different is offered in MLS, then the buyer still owes you the difference between those two. If your number is lower, then you cannot collect the higher number. Paragraph B5, attached list. Do we use an addendum for this list? No. All forms in CAR and zip form now will automatically go to an overflow addendum that will automatically, so once you start writing, if it fills up the space, it'll automatically create one. So yeah, technically, but you don't have to like download an addendum to do that. I can put a maximum amount, and in reality, that amount can come from either party. Correct. Yes. The amount that you've agreed to is the amount that you've agreed to, and your buyer can negotiate with your seller. Currently, if it's on the MLS, it's guaranteed, but it's not guaranteed any other way. Just like anything that's in the MLS, if there is a concessions field for everything that the seller is willing to give a concessions for, you still have to write that into the contract. Just like if somebody put in the new refrigerator goes with the house, you still have to write that into the contract. It isn't an automatic. Something that's in the MLS is not a contractual agreement unless it's written into the contract. Same with this, same with agreements, same with payments. Once the MLS agreement goes away, which right now is binding, it will not be binding after this. So we cannot get more than what is in the agreement, but we can take less. How does that work? Well, that's just how it works. Unfortunately, that's how the world works. You've agreed to be paid a certain amount. If somebody else is offering something else, you are not. I'm guessing you could probably have an agreement with your buyer that this person is offering more money. And so, but you would have to get him to sign off on that. The likelihood of that happening is not super high, because that would essentially mean that they were paying a higher price for you to get higher compensation. I doubt that that would be something they'd be interested in, but again, that the power is in their hands, not yours. You're not automatically allowed to take it. Does the buyer's agreement need to be shown to seller when you present the offer? No. If they ask to see, you can show them that you have an agreement, or you can show them a percentage or whatever if they're questioning it. But no, that is it's between you and the buyer, and that's an agreement between the two of you. You can show them the percentage if you want to, but they aren't allowed everything else in that form. Within the 3 months included in the escrow period, or 3 months, is only for searching properties and getting an accepted offer. This agreement timeline can only be for 3 months. So if you have a 3-month agreement, 3-month agreement timeline, and then that second section that I mentioned, after that agreement is no longer in effect, you have a certain amount of time that you will still be paid if the person purchases a property that you showed them, then yeah, that technically could extend that. just like with a listing. It technically extends the listing if somebody buys a property that was shown to them while you had that listing. It is not true that there can be no offer of compensation in the MLS, or is it not true that there can be no offer of compensation in the MLS, even in confidential agent remarks, but that there will be a reference for sellers willing to pay an amount for concessions, or that simply they're willing to pay concessions, or that they don't want to pay concessions? Well, that's a good question. As it stands right now, the intent is to have a section, and actually CRMLS already does have it. It's in Matrix right now for concessions. However, the DOJ has indicated that that's something that they may not agree with, so that may not stay. And what they have said is that it is likely that you will be able to have on your own board, on your own office listing, your own broker's listing, that they're willing to pay compensation. You can't put an amount, you can't put a percentage, but you can say that they're willing to do so. And again, that's a conversation to have with your seller as to whether they want to or not, whether it's in their best interest or not. And you want to make sure that you're careful to give them options when you have those discussions. But yeah, that's something that's kind of iffy right now. It stands. Yes, that's true. We will have a section. You can put a flat amount, you can put a flat percentage, or you can just simply say they're willing to pay concessions. You cannot say what they're for. You can't say for buyer representation, for example. That will not be allowed. You can say, sellers willing to pay concessions. Can you, as a buyer agent, reduce your commission amount if the seller has agreed to pay less commission? Of course, you can always reduce. That would require a separate written agreement. However, like everything, this is a contract. If you're going to change it, you change it with a form, you change it in writing. Is this buyer's contract available in Spanish? Many of my clients are Hispanic. They're working on that. Again, as I mentioned, this literally just changed a few days ago. It is still so much in flux that it is likely to be translated in its final form. But in this mid-range form, no, probably not. What if I negotiate higher than what the seller is offering? Then your buyer would be responsible for the difference, or you can negotiate that as part of the transaction. You being the buyer is through you, just like you would for a price, be negotiating what he wants. So you would write that into an offer. The buyer requests that the seller pay X amount towards his buyer representation agreement. There seems to be a contradiction. The agreement is non-exclusive, but the client owes commission if you show them a property and they end up buying with a different realtor. That sounds like exclusive. It sounds like it, but it's not, because the buyer can look at 123 any street with you and 125 any street with another realtor. Depending on what they sign with. So for example, if you have an exclusive listing on a property for a house, no other realtor can sell that house, right? If you have an exclusive exclusive agreement with a buyer, no other realtor can work with that buyer. So what you have is a property exclusive, but not a buyer exclusive. In my narrow niche of real estate, working with retirees, my standard time frame in working with buyer clients before purchase is a year. Based on, you would just have to renewals. Based on this exclusive form being only valid for a certain time frame, I will require to renew this agreement numerous times. Yes, you will. And that's a DOJ pronouncement. That is not us. That's not the board. That's not CAR. That's not NAR. That is what the DOJ has said. And that's part of that agreement with the lawsuit. So we can negotiate our percentage or flat fee down, but not up. That's correct. Well, you can negotiate it up. It's just not automatic. If something is being offered that's a different price, you're going to have to, again, renegotiate with your buyer to have him agree that you can be paid a higher percentage. What if you negotiate, for example, a 1% commission? I don't really like having the actual percentages in there, guys, but if you negotiate a percentage commission with your buyer, but find out the home they want to write an offer on is paying a higher percentage, can you then cancel the 1% you negotiated with the buyer since the seller's paying? Again, you want to have an agreement with your buyer regarding what you're worth. If you've just told him you're only worth a lower amount, and then you want to accept a higher amount from somebody else, you're going to have to renegotiate that with your buyer. Again, this is all negotiable. It's always all been negotiable. But we have always had this agreement with the MLS, which was a binding agreement, which meant that the seller and the seller's agent pre-negotiated our payment, our worth. So now it's up to us. And now we get to have that negotiation with our buyer. So our buyer can determine and with us what we are worth. So again, you want to have that discussion when you sign this agreement regarding what you're going to be paid. You can always renegotiate that number down if you feel like that's required to close the deal, just like we've always done. But if you're going to start low, I always think it's harder to explain high. So are the forms required as of June 25th or by the end of the year? The forms will be released in June. So these forms will be the forms that are available as of June. And then the agreement to have a buyer representation agreement in place before you show a property will be required by the end of the year. The date of that, nobody is really quite sure yet, but we're working on it. If we believe these forms will continue to change and now they have pushed back the date, is the information pertinent? Yes, because will change is going to be something minor. It's not going to be a major change on that form. Can you please clarify again the implementation date for the requirement of BRBC for all agents, not just realtors? That's going to be whenever the lawsuit is settled, and the lawsuit timeline is malleable. It has not been set in stone. It was originally going to be August. It's now, I believe, been pushed back to November. So I don't know when that will be. It's when the lawsuit is settled. I would guess this is printed out when sitting with a buyer, not being able to type to an additional addendum automatic. Your method of working with your buyer is going to be your method of working with your buyer. You can bring along the additional page if you feel that that's more acceptable. Sometimes retirees prefer things in writing. I have an iPad, so I bring that with me, and then I can send it to them in DigiSign or DocuSign and have them sign it and have it all done right there and sent to their email. Because that then satisfies the requirement of the DRE to deliver a signed agreement to the person signing it as soon as practicable. Love that word, practicable. It's just fun to say. But again, it's up to you. Having that, the ability to do that, perhaps have your seller or your buyer meet with you in your office, or, whatever works for you, however you want to do that. But the ability to have that additional form, you can simply print one out and bring it with you. When is the very last date that a seller's agent can show CBB on MLS? Depends on the MLS you belong to. CRMLS, as I mentioned, already has the section in there for compensation, not compensation, cooperation. They could remove it at any time. They have stated that they are not going to remove it, I believe, until August 12th. August 17th is the date that we're supposed to have those all in place. But again, that can change. But as of right now, it's August 12th. I believe SDMLS has said that they're going to wait longer. I think they're going to wait until it's actually implemented by the DOJ. But again, I don't know what date that's going to be. The MLSs are independent, and so they have their timeline is their timeline. On what date must this form be used to get compensation? Right now, it is not mandated. It will be mandated. What date it will be mandated, again, depends on when that lawsuit is finally settled. But it's going to be this year at some point, whether it's August 17th or November. I don't know if anybody really knows for sure. But that's what we're working with. If the DOJ makes any changes, we're going to see forms change again and timelines change again. How about unforeseen circumstances that may be asked after home inspection discoveries? That's the same as any other negotiation, guys. You just negotiate. You negotiate back and forth, just like we do now. The only difference is you're starting at the beginning with setting your price for what you're worth. That's it. That's really the only difference. What will be the best practice for getting paid? Having a CRBC. In fact, it's going to be the only practice. You're going to be required to have a buyer broker representation agreement in order to get paid, in order to show property. Bijan Zaire, I talk fast. I'm sorry. I apologize, but it is being recorded, and you will be able to get a copy of that. When does the MLS BBC go away? As I mentioned, different MLSs have different timelines on that. You can check with your MLS, and they will let you know when they're gonna remove that, if they know. Some of them don't. There should be a part in the contract to extend for another 3 months. It's just a modification of terms, just like any other extension. You don't have an automatic extension on almost on any contract, because that's not legal. So you want to have an agreement with your buyer to look, we're going to look for, 3 months. And if that doesn't work, we'll extend, maybe change the area. You want to renegotiate timelines and prices maybe, or locations. I mean, how many times have you been working with a buyer and we got to raise our price. We got to look in a different area. We got to look in a, I love this school district, but dang, the house that we can afford is a 1-bedroom shack. Let's move to this area that has a bigger house. Those are the kinds of things you are going to incorporate into your discussions with your buyers. Same with the timeline. In 3 months, if you haven't found them a house, maybe they're going to look in a different area. So all of that might change. But yeah, you renegotiate at the time. If it's between BA and buyer, then why is the negotiation between seller and buyer? Buyer's the broker and the buyer? No, the agreement of how much you're going to be paid is between you and your buyer, because the buyer is going to just say, all right, you're worth it, agent. You're worth this amount for me to have the expertise and knowledge that you present. So I'm willing to pay that amount. If the seller is willing to pay a different amount, then yeah, that's up to the buyer with your help to negotiate. Just like the buyer agrees on a price he's going to pay for a house, but you help negotiate that. And that's where your skill comes into play. That's what this is. This is the negotiation of a payment of a fee that the buyer has agreed to. I know, I'm trying, Linda. Okay, so we're getting some of the same questions in here. And so I'm going to go through the rest of this form and get to the end of it, and we'll ask some more at the end. I just think a lot of times when you're trying to follow a form, it's difficult when you get, you go so far there past it and you don't remember your questions. So again, this specifies the properties that you're looking at, and you're going to put in here what property type, the location, additional descriptions, specified only specific properties, the properties on the identified on the attached list, if you've got more than a couple that will fit on this form, properties excluded from representation. Sometimes they've already seen a house. They went to an open house with another broker and agreed or signed a form with that person. So you want to make sure that those are excluded from this form as well. Additional buyer preferences and priorities. So there's another form, BIPP, that I mentioned that has things like how many bedrooms and bathrooms and areas, et cetera. So that's what that is. The compensation we went through. And the payments from third parties we've gone through, continuation right to payment for broker involved properties. So again, that's how many days after the close, and you have to prove involvement essentially. And there's a form for that, shockingly. The buyer financial personal information form. Within 5 days from the execution of the agreement, the buyer intends to purchase using VA or some other type of loan that won't allow them to pay fees, or he doesn't have sufficient funds to pay broker. And he knows this. So again, that's that discussion that you're going to have with your buyer. Look, I don't have enough money to pay you. I think you're worth, $1 million, but I don't have any money to pay you. So that's going to have to be a negotiation. So then you get to the property that the buyer wants to see. The seller says, I'm not going to pay anything. And then you say, all right, we'll move on to a different property. Or the buyer says, no, I really, really want this one. Let's figure something out. Then you try and negotiate that. Again, it's going to be a negotiation. It's not going to be a slam dunk. It's going to be something that you have a discussion about. And then you work on each individual transaction as it comes. So the note, again, it says it up above, it says it again here, compensation to broker, the amount or rate of real estate commissions is not fixed by law. They are set by each broker individually and may be negotiable between the buyer and the broker. And the buyer has been advised that who compensates the broker in a real estate about who compensates the broker in a real estate transactions and how much is negotiable. And the whole thing is negotiable. So again, conversations with your buyer. This clarifies that those properties that you identified above that you are due compensation for. And here it talks again about the non-exclusive representation and broker involvement. And because this was a question, I'm going to read it. Compensation is payable only if there was broker involvement. Again, there's a form that you will give to your buyer that clarifies what broker involvement properties you're going to identify. And broker involvement means that the buyer physically entered and was shown the property. The broker showed the property to the buyer virtually. Sometimes during COVID, for example, we had several deals that were done completely virtually. And this, allows for that. The broker submitted to seller a signed written offer from the buyer to acquire, lease, exchange, or obtain an option on the property. And the broker performed market analysis related to the property or reviewed property specific documents or disclosures. And the property was introduced to buyer by broker for one for which the broker acted on buyer's behalf. So if you have your assistant, for example. However, merely sending a buyer a list of properties shall not be deemed broker involvement without documented action on the part of the broker analyzing the property for the buyer specifically, or assisting buyer in the potential acquisition of the property, or communicating with the seller or the seller's agent regarding a buyer's potential acquisition of the property. So basically, you're going to have to prove that you had involvement, the broker had involvement with that purchase. The exclusive representation buyer acquisition is checked in paragraph 2A. The buyer includes any person or entity other than the broker related to the buyer or who in any manner acts on buyer's behalf to acquire property described in 2B. So that means if your buyer decides he wants to do a sneaky workaround and he gets his Aunt Mabel to go in and buy that house because he doesn't want to pay you, this covers that. The broker shall be entitled to compensation based on the amount or the timeline that you put in paragraph 2D. And the 2.3, which is that extension of time. The timing of compensation, the compensation is payable upon completion of any resulting transaction and through escrow. Buyer shall be entitled to compensation whether any escrow resulting from the misagreement closes during or after the representation period. So one of the questions was, did this 3-month include only the showing time frame? It includes any transaction that results based on that time frame. Accounting for payment, and that payment through escrow, it's the same thing. A buyer irrevocably assigns to broker the compensation provided for in this agreement. Again, it's a contract, guys. So this agreement is what allows for that payment to be made. Accounting for payments to broker if the broker also represents seller. Notwithstanding paragraph 2D2, if the broker has a listing agreement with the seller of the property to be purchased, no credit towards buyer's compensation obligation shall be given for the amount due broker by the seller for the compensation broker is allowed as the seller's agent. Buyer will pay the amount in paragraph 2D1 less any amount offered by broker to buyer's agent. So that was the other question, are they allowed to be paid through other means if the seller's offering? Yeah. But no more than the amount that is agreed to. Disclosure of anticipated payment to broker by others. Broker at the earliest practicable time will disclose to buyer the amount of compensation. Now this really is probably going to go away when this stuff comes off the MLS, but it says he will disclose to buyer the amount of compensation broker expects to receive from a third party on that property by providing buyer with either a copy of the cooperating broker compensation agreement or other writing, including website offers showing an offer of compensation from the seller's broker, which means you can give them a copy of the MLS printout right now. The broker independently or through escrow will disclose the final compensation broker receives from anyone other than buyer. And that's where somebody offering a different amount comes in. And if the amount is different, the buyer is only required to pay you the amount that you agreed to. If you want more, you have to negotiate with the buyer for that amount. If the third party does not pay as anticipated and the third party has contractually agreed with the buyer to pay all or part of broker compensation, buyer assigns to broker any rights. Buyer has to pursue the third party for any such compensation. So that means if seller doesn't pay and now you haven't been paid by the buyer, you don't go after the buyer, you go after the seller. The cancellation of buyer representation agreement, that clarifies that 30 days, that timeline of when you can cancel. The properties excluded from representation. And again, those are those properties that either they've seen before, that they looked at with another broker, or that were given to you as a list when you signed with this buyer. Hey, I had a previous agreement. These are the properties I showed with them. That's what those are. Financial and personal information. If any property for which the buyer writes an offer to purchase, the buyer authorized broker to include a term in the buyer's offer seeking payment from seller of buyer's compensation obligation to broker. This buyer representation agreement is contingent upon either the seller agreeing in an accepted offer or counteroffer to pay broker, or seller's broker agreeing in a separate document to pay buyer's broker as follows. If the purchase agreement does not include a term obligating seller to pay broker and the broker is unable to reach an agreement with the seller, broker is not obligated to represent the buyer and may terminate any agency relationship related to that purchase. So again, that was the question about if they don't want to pay it and there's a difference in the amount and they can't cover it. What are your options? You can say no. They don't have the money to do it. You don't have to. You aren't obligated to continue to work with them, essentially. Do we ever really go after anybody that doesn't pay us? Not really, but I will tell you this, in the other areas where this has been tried, there's several states where it's already in use. In Northern California and Oregon, it's already in use. And the amount of compensation that the buyer's agents have negotiated has actually risen based on this, because again, you have a conversation with the buyer about what it is that you provide and what you do. And it becomes more clear to them that they have a say in this negotiation. It has not resulted in, carnage. The management approval. And this is interesting too, because a lot of people don't realize this. If you agree to a number that your broker doesn't agree to, they have the right within 5 days to negate it. And one of the reasons that it's required to have those forms, those signed forms delivered to your broker within 2 days is because they have 3 days after that to approve it and say, yeah, okay, we'll go ahead and go with this. Or if they don't want to, if you've agreed to that, somebody used the example of nothing earlier, your broker's probably not going to agree to that and they can negate the form. Legally authorized signer. Again, we mentioned that earlier, whether the signatures show that they're a legally authorized signer, that becomes like a SBSA, so that they have the agreement that that is who they legally are. Exclusive representation. If exclusive is checked, another question we've had a lot of, this agreement shall be exclusive and irrevocable. Broker will devote time and resources to assist buyer in finding and acquiring the property in the expectation of being paid. Buyer shall not enter into another representation agreement in conflict with this agreement. So you are the only broker that's working with that buyer within the confines of the agreement that you're talking about. So if you have a zip code, a property, whatever it is, you are the only broker who has agreement for that, and that's exclusive. However, the buyer can work with other agents in other areas that are not part of that agreement. So the compensation, if the buyer is entitled to compensation, if the buyer acquires the property during the representation period with or without broker involvement, even if another broker is also entitled to be paid for representing buyer. So basically, this is irrevocable. It's not, unless it's canceled, unless you agreed to something different, and they signed with somebody else and buy the same property, they owe you both. But again, that's, we're used to that. It's just like a listing, right? You can only sign one listing and have an agent represent you. The confirmation of compensation, again, they're going to clarify in here what the amount is in 2D1, which is the one you agreed to above. This is what I'm worth. This is what I'm going to be paid, either a percentage or a flat fee and another amount, maybe for a TC or whatever. or specified in the attached compensation schedule. Sometimes there's, weird things that people agree to. The entity buyers, again, this is where you have that clarification of that signature, but if the signature is above this, this clarifies what it was. And, all right, so let's go back to some of these questions. Yes, what if the buyer signs multiple exclusive BRBCs with several agents without the buyer or himself or agents knowing? Oh, you're talking about, and that has happened actually. Monica brings up a good point. Sometimes there are unscrupulous agents out there who just send somebody a sheaf of papers and then they sign them without reading. Well, there's two things wrong with that. One is the agent shouldn't have done it, and B, the buyer should have read it. You could argue that probably end up in a lawsuit of some kind. You could argue that they didn't know what they were signing. Those are never an instant answer. Those are always a drawn out process because people tend to draw those things out. Is this session recorded to attendees? Yes, it is. Buyer is looking for land and a starter home all over the county, getting inquiries daily. Shall I state exclusive to San Diego County land homes? Again, have that discussion with your buyer. What areas are you looking at, sir? What areas are you specifying? You can maybe do all of San Diego County, but specify land, specify pricing, specify size, only 5 acres or more. Whatever it is that they're looking for, you're going to have that discussion with them, clarify with them that that's what you're signing them and obligating them to pay you for. And because they're looking at all of San Diego County, you want to include all of San Diego County, but it's only going to be for these properties, et cetera, or this level of properties. Does that mean compensation in the MLS can stay beyond August 17th in full? Again, that's an MLS question. I have to ask your MLS. Will CRMLS continue to offer? No, they will not. According to them, they are not. But again, that's a CRMLS question. Can you confirm if the BA compensation will now be an additional cost on top of the purchase price, or if the BA compensation is rolled into the purchase price as it is now? Depends on what you negotiate in that transaction. I'm going to say that the vast majority of properties, obviously up until now, have included that buyer compensation because that's the way we've always done it. If you go into a negotiation where the seller is saying, I'm not going to pay buyer compensation, and your buyer's like, fine, I have the money, I'm going to do it that way, but I'm going to reduce the price. That's, again, a negotiation. That's within the confines of that contract between the seller and the buyer. Sometimes the seller is going to offer a higher price and mentally figure that they're going to include some compensation in that. If in that negotiation the buyer says, no, I'm going to pay it, and asks to reduce it, that's an agreement that the two of them can come to with your help. There is no set thing. It's all negotiable. If we agreed on a certain percentage with our buyer and we show a new house, builders are paying sometimes a different number for compensation. Sure. Have that conversation with your buyer and say, for these 3 properties, maybe have a separate BRBC and say that the number for these properties is going to be different. Or a lot of times a buyer's going to argue back with you and say, well, you don't do anything for those, so give it back to me so I can have closing costs. That's going to be a negotiation you have with your buyer in the conversation that you're going to have when they have them sign this agreement. That is a conversation that should be had. They should know what they're paying and what the differences are, and that they have the opportunity to negotiate some of that. As a listing agent with the seller's consent mentions in their listing that the buyer's agent compensation is a certain percentage, does it mean that you showed that property, if you showed that property to your buyer, you are entitled to receive a percentage for your services, provided they have signed the buyer represent? They can't say it in the listing. The MLS is not going to allow any mention of specifics with regard to compensation in the MLS after this timeline, whatever it ends up being. It is not going to be in the MLS that they are offering a percentage. So your agreement is going to be with your buyer, and then subsequently you negotiate in that contract with the seller as to whether they're going to pay a percentage, if they're going to pay a percentage, and if so, what percentage that is. I'm seeing listings now with 0 compensation. Correct. That's always been the case. That has always been available to be the case, actually, for years now. And that is a good time to practice your negotiation skills and have this conversation with your buyer and have a buyer representation agreement signed so that you have the agreement in place to negotiate with. 3G3 on the contract allows for you to negotiate compensation differentials now as it sits. Can we have an exclusive BRBC agreement with a client without putting a list of homes on? Sure. You can have, you just have to specify what. You can't just have it be open. We're going to show them anything for any amount of time. You have a specific, they want to look in, it has to be reasonable. All right. So contractual law requires that there be an agreement on, the product, the price, the timing, et cetera. So you want to look at that and make sure that you have actual agreement. They know what you're helping them with, and you know what they're looking for. It can't just, we want to buy something and we have $10, right? So you have to have some guidelines in there. After 3 months, if nothing is changing, you need to do a modification in terms, or do you have to do a new buyer representation agreement? Well, I'll get to that. There is another form that changes these terms. Regarding payments from third parties, does this form go to escrow? Where will our payments physically come from if the seller pays? If the buyer must pay full compensation, will it still be paid through escrow? Everything is going to be paid through escrow. Whatever you've agreed to with your buyer and seller, that will only be paid through escrow. For CRMLS, so you're not going to be getting checks from your buyers, for example. August 13th is the last day you can have the commission on your listing. Yeah, they're going to stop it as of the 12th. So the 13th, it'll be flipped to the new way. But they have said that they may change that, and they may do so. They may do it sooner. So again, check with your MLS. Imagine with the VA update that the section will be changed before release. Maybe, because VA has not said that it's permanent. And I think it's going to depend on what the DOJ does as to whether they take that out or not. But the specific reference to VA probably will be. It may just say loans that are not going to allow payments. Is there a form to identify the broker involved properties, like when a listing expires or there are exclusions? Yeah, yes, there is. There is a form. It's a really interesting form. You scroll down really fast, so I don't remember the section numbered, but how can we disclose to the buyer the amount of compensation before the offer is written? It's D1 on this form. If compensation from the seller is negotiated as part of the offer process. That's a negotiation in the contract. There is no specified amount that's automatic. Where is the rule of delivery to the broker within 2 days? Is that CAR requirement? That's a state rule. You have to give any signed form that obligates to the broker within 48 hours. And this form specifically states 5 days that they have to renege it. All these forms will go to escrow, correct? They will also have to figure out the disbursement amount. Yes, that's correct. These forms go to escrow. Can I have the seller and the buyer pay partial commissions? Yeah, you can negotiate whatever you want to negotiate. That's the whole point of this, that it's all negotiable. The buyers send you properties via Zillow, Realtor, et cetera, all the time that they are interested in while looking on their own. What do we do now? Can we just write that specified property, the original BRBC, or do we have a draft a new one? No, you don't have to have the properties on the BRBC. You can have an area. You can have, 3-bedroom homes up to X price. You can have whatever guidelines you want. I just mentioned the properties because sometimes people only want to obligate themselves to a broker or an agent for 1 or 2 properties to see if it works. It's like dating, right? You don't want to marry somebody on that first date, although there are some shows about that. So that is sort of what that is. Yeah, some people, relocation buyers, for example, are automatically going to sign a form and be obligated to you because that's the deal that they signed. It just depends on the buyer. And that's for you to have that discussion with them regarding. But most of the time it's going to be area specific and end result specific, right? We want a 3-bedroom house in this school district for X price. How do you see comparable market values being divided? That's a good question, Lori, because I think what they're going to do, this is just me guessing, but I think what they're going to do is separate out commissions for old listings so that we can determine what the actual amount was, the price of the house, and what part was commission or compensation. We can't use the wrong C word now. But I don't know exactly because some of that is difficult. They have concessions, they have a concessions form in there already, which is for things like they paid for the roof, they paid for termite, they paid for whatever they paid for. And I don't know if they will separate out compensation to the agent in that concessions form or not. Again, that's going to depend on what the DOJ settlement says. But either way, they being appraisers, have always looked at that that concessions form to see if there was a huge payout for, termite or roof or whatever, and incorporated that in their valuation of that property. So that will continue. I don't think they're going to separate out agent concessions, but concessions will be separated out. Everything is negotiable. The buyer does hard trade regarding personal property, et cetera. Personal property is not on a real estate contract. That has to be a separate agreement. That's a personal property, and that is taxed differently and dealt with differently than real estate is. So no, it would not be. They could maybe negotiate something between themselves regarding that, but that is not part of most lenders will tell you as well. They can't be contributed as part of the negotiation as the purchase price. It can be, bonus, but they don't look at it as price. Buyers sending me homes daily all over the county, different form. Yeah, no, different areas. When do you find out what the seller is offering for commission? Only after entering escrow? No, that's the negotiation on the contract. That's what you do when you negotiate a contract. You write your offer and you say, I've signed this agreement with the buyer Bob. Buyer Bob is willing to pay X amount. Okay, seller Fred, what are you willing to pay? Seller Fred says, okay, I'll pay Y amount. Okay, they come to agreement. They say, all right, he's going to pay X, he's going to pay Y. That covers me. Poof, done. You send it into escrow. That's how you find out. You negotiate. Just like you don't know really what the price is of a home until you write an offer, right? So write an offer. Can you kindly attach these forms to the recording? Yeah, they will be. They are. And I have also sent the text. Will a text from a listing agent who texts that they will pay a certain percentage to buyer's agent be considered proof of agreement of compensation? No, because the listing agent isn't who's paying it. It's going to be the seller. You could argue that because the seller, one of the things, really try to get this through your head, the DOJ has clearly specified that they do not want broker to broker payments. Okay. So whatever the broker says, they are not going to have that be part of the contract between the buyer and the seller. So if you're saying if an agent is telling you he's going to pay you something, then the agent is going to tell you he's going to pay something. You're still going to have to disclose that to your buyer, but that is not part of the contract for the sale of the property. And I don't think that that's going to be a thing. If they just accidentally tell you they're going to pay you money, then I don't see that as being a thing happening. What about listings on the MLS with CBB? Do we have to change this later for concessions? I don't know how the MLS is going to do that. I don't know if they're going to automatically transfer that, what they're going to do. That's an MLS question. I don't really know. Is there a broker involvement form? Yes. You misunderstood my question. The form says that agent needs to disclose to the buyer third-party compensation before the offer is written. How do we know the amount of, that's for right now. That's for things that are on the MLS right now. And if they're on the MLS right now and you know that there is third-party compensation, you give them a copy of the MLS printout, which has the third-party compensation written in it, what the percentage is for each one shown. So for right now, until all of this changes, when there is a compensation that's offered, then you show that to your buyer before they write an offer, because it becomes part of their negotiation in that offer. All right, I'm going to stop sharing this for a second and move to another form just because we've spent way long on this form. And go back to let's see, there we go. Okay, so this form is the buyer identification of preferences and priorities. That's the one I mentioned, that they can put down what they want to see, where they want to see it, etc. And this form clarifies what they're looking at, what areas they're looking at, square footage, lot size, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what this one clarifies. So now this one. Is the compensation agreement. So if there is, for example, FSBO and you don't have any agreement right now, you can, this is like it's a temporary fix for those, like a lot of people were asking about situations that are currently active and we haven't yet switched to the new system. That's what this is going to cover. So basically what this is, it's a compensation agreement for use if there's no listing agreement. So a FSBO, a buyer representation agreement, or a single party compensation agreement. So you're going to put this in place and you can do it for either side. So this will clarify some of those questions when you have a property that is not listed on the MLS and you still have to worry about how anybody's going to be paid on anything. So you can have this clarified as well currently. Once the compensation section changes, then we are all going to be in a so let me find the form that has. Okay, one of the questions was this one, which is the disclosure and modification to the buyer representation agreement. So what this does is it changes that buyer representation agreement and or modifies it so you can extend it. So you can extend your 3 months to another 3 months, or you can change the area. You can do anything you want to, but this is modifying it. This is a modification of the BRBC. And that's how you will handle those changes. So this is the one that I was mentioning that's sort of the dating form, okay? So this is the, oops, let me go back to that. There we go. This is when you're dating. You haven't agreed to fully commit to this person yet. So if for visitors attending an open house, brokers right to represent visitor. I love this one. The limited property representation and broker compensation agreement. So you are not required to sign a representation agreement to see this property at an open house. If you've already signed one and you already are working with an agent, if you don't want the agent holding the open house to represent you, you don't sign the form. If you've already signed one with somebody else, don't sign this form. For visitors touring more than one property with an agent, if you've already signed a representation agreement with another broker, you should inform the agent of the name of the other broker. So all of the questions that come up when you're having an open house and somebody comes in and they go, I don't think I signed anything. I might have signed something. I did sign something. I didn't sign something. This covers pretty much any of those eventualities. And it clarifies what the representation period is. If you have them agree when they come in through that open house, or maybe you're just working with them for 2 days on a weekend, for example, what those timelines are, the amount of compensation that you've agreed to, it's similar to the other form. It's just a shortened version. It's like a little mini version of it, right? And this is when you don't know if you want to marry this person. You only want to go out with them a couple of times and see if you relate. This is the coffee date. And that's what this is, a little short version of that original BRBC form. It basically has a lot of the same information, except it's, like I said, a short version of it. And it clarifies if they are touring an open house and what that identifies for them. Okay, let me go back to, and then you have the second modification of terms for the buyer representation agreement, which is this guy, which is pretty clear. It's a modification of terms, period. So you're going to change the spot that you're looking. You're going to change the size that you're looking, to change the price that you're looking, or you're changing the time. Those are all clarified here. This carries that same 5-day right of rescission by your manager or broker. So you want to make sure you turn that into your manager or broker as quickly as possible. So we're running really, really short on time. We need to do this like 12 times, especially in this sort of roundhouse with all of the questions. I do feel that a lot of this is stuff that is going to work itself out as you work through these projects or as you work through these forms. One thing I'm going to suggest to all of you is that you have workshops in your offices. Talk to your management, maybe if you have a mastermind that you belong to, have sit downs with the other agents and go through scenarios and ask these questions and kind of go through the issues that come up, because a lot of this is going to sort of explain itself as you go through them. Does the broker of record and the agent need to sign the buyer rep? No, the agent signs the buyer rep, the real estate broker approves it. If you'll see down at the bottom, the real estate broker firm, that's going to be your manager or your broker, if your manager has signing privileges. Who is the FSBO related form number mentioned, not on the MLS? That's in here, and it'll, I don't know it off the top of my head, but it's going to be something that that's going to be in that, the link that I gave you as well. Okay, so there's a couple of other questions up here. Let me go through real quick. This sounds like a nightmare. Yeah, it's fun. It's fun times. It actually is more complicated than it seems with the forms. They're trying to cover like all eventualities. And I think that always, there's a saying, the committee invented the camel. And I think that that's kind of part of what we have here. There's so many possibilities because just like you, just like the other agents in your office, and just like your clients, everybody is an individual. And so there are a whole set of situations that could occur for any of them and for all of them, essentially. So you have to want to try and cover all of those eventualities. Is it a requirement before you show a property or before you send an offer? It's going to be a requirement before you show a property. It is currently not. It will be. And that's going to be the thing that I think most people are going to have to come to terms with, is you have to have something signed before you can show a property. And that's why that dating form is, I think, going to be helpful, because it allows people to work with you on 1 or 2 properties if that's all they want to do. And it allows you to show your worth to them, and then they want to work with you for more. What is the name of the modification form again? It's modification terms, MT. Does everyone entering an open house have to complete a dating form or otherwise? No, it says you don't have to sign a form, but again, that's going to be up to your seller. If your seller does not want to let people in their home that refuse to identify themselves because they don't want to give you their email, then it's up to them as to whether or not they allow them in. You have to have a discussion with them. I would suggest getting in writing from them that they have given you instruction not to let people in. But again, you're not going to be the bouncer at the door and, refusing to let people in. You can say, post it, you're required by my seller to sign this before you come in. But again, that's a question that you're going to have to ask them at the time. Okay, if it takes a break. All right. So if anybody has any other questions, I can answer them, but we are out of time in 1 minute, guys. And this is a crazy set of circumstances that we're sort of in the middle here of things that aren't yet quite settled. But I don't believe that it serves you to not know what's coming until it's all in place. That would give you, roughly 20 days to figure it all out before it goes live. And it's a requirement. So take your time, go through these forms, look at all of the different forms. Again, I sent the link. I think Shirley put it in the section so that you can find it. If you can't grab it from the chat, you can go to CAR and go to I'll have to look up where it is. But it's on CAR. I believe it's forms under training, under knowledge, or little things across the top. I always forget what it is. I just do it by automatic rote because I've done it so much. But we will send another copy, maybe with the cover page. I'll include the link so that you can get to this page. There are 68 forms that are coming out in June. The ones that are related to the lawsuit are the ones that are specific to the, you know, the broker representation, et cetera. We're also redoing the purchase agreement. And so the listing agreement's already been, or the listing agreement has been redone as well. So it shows that same grid as the purchase agreement. So there are a lot of changes that should help, but they are a little bit of a learning curve at the beginning. And again, if you go through them, you look through them, identify which ones you're going to be working with. That's what's going to help you to, you know, be miles ahead of so many of the other agents out there. And again, we're all here to help. We're all here to answer questions, and we will be happy to work with you. Many of you know me, and you know I'll answer my phone. I will help you with this. I think we made, you know, I'm going to talk to Shirley. I would love to have like a round robin sort of mastermind, maybe hold it at the board office and have people come in and kind of ask these questions and work through them with the forms in hand. I think sometimes that can help in situations like this where we have so many moving parts to be able to do something like that. So we'll talk about that and see if we can put that in place. I think that would really help a lot of people to kind of, you know, see how it really works in the real world. All right, everybody, I think we are getting close to the end. We're already 2 minutes past. I really appreciate you taking the time. The ability to stay ahead of what's coming is really going to hold you in good stead. And I think a lot of you are just wonderful for having done this. It's a lot, I know. 68 forms. I just looked at that and went, and I love forms. I'm a nerd about that. And I just went, holy smokes. So I get it. But I'm here for you. We'll help you in any way we can. The board is really good at this kind of stuff as well. Feel free to call. We're here to help. Thank you.